Welcome back, troops. Let's Tab 59. Ankle's still playing up. I've only gone a mile up the road. I've turned around and come back. So I'm going to do this video by the house here. Now, before I get into this video, I want to give a shout out to one of the subscribers, J-Mac. J-Mac's been following the channel for some time now. He's always commenting. He's ex-airborne forces. I'm not sure which battalion. I'm sure he was para-reg, but I'm not sure which one, Jay, you was in. I can't remember, mate. I think you might have told me. But he messaged me the other day, and apparently you're in hospital, Jay. I'm not sure exactly what's wrong, mate, but I know you're laying there getting bored. Keep your eyes off them nurses and get well soon, mate. I'm sure other people all on here will echo those comments. So get better soon, mate. Okay, I'll have to sit down. So I've got one donation to read out from our challenge. Someone's donated. They're anonymous, but they've donated, and what they say in their comment was, "For those that never came home, we shall remember, rest in peace." There's a lovely message there, anonymous, and thank you for your donation. So our donation stands now. It shuts down on Saturday the 21st, 2024, September 21st, 2024. We're currently standing at £8,686.86. But on top of that, the gift aid, which is £1,594.75. That gives us a total of £10,281.61. So thank you very much, as always, to all these donators that have been putting all this stuff in for us. It's fantastic. It's got us a long, long way up. Okay, let's get into today's video then. Well, what I want to talk about is the Territorial Army and the Army Reserve, as it's now called, and just give you a few bits of background, a few bits of information. I'm sure there's many of you out there that have either served with the Territorial Army or might be serving right now with the Army Reserve, or have done in the past, or you may have been permanent staff instructors, PSIs or SPSIs, senior permanent staff instructors, attached to TA units. Or you may even be one of the cap badge depots where you've had Territorial Army soldiers coming through, completing their basic training. And we'll chat all a bit about that as we go. So what was it all about? This might be of interest to people who have got no idea about our reserve forces, especially if you're maybe overseas. I'm sure most overseas countries, United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, etc., all over, have got some form of reserve or part-time army. And of course, we've got the Auxiliary Navy, we've got the Auxiliary Air Force, etc. as well, but I don't know too much about those at the moment. I want to talk mainly about the Army, the British Army. Okay, so the Territorial Army was actually initially called the Territorial Force, and it was formed in 1908. Now, prior to that, in the 1800s, we had the yeomanry, and we had like a militia type forces, and they were volunteer forces, and they decided to, in 1908, to amalgamate these all together and call it the Territorial Force. And it was designed initially to a couple of reasons. They wanted to, the government, that is, or the military, the War Office, whatever it was called back then in 1908, they wanted to have, or to avoid having to have conscription. So in times of war, rather than have to call people up to go to war, we'd have this reserve army, if you like, the Territorial Force, which could do that for us. We'd bolster the army up, especially, and that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to be able to reinforce the British regular army on its expeditionary campaigns, as we were back then, all over the world. However, it didn't work out, and the key was in the name, Territorial Force, and political opposition was strong against them being sent overseas. They wanted to hold it back here as a Territorial Force, keep it on UK soil, so that if the army was away on a big operation, a big campaign or something, we had some soldiers back here looking after the UK mainland. So that's what happened. And so, like I say, it didn't get deployed. However, when World War I come along, so that was 1908 when it's formed the Territorial Force, that's what it was called. Come the First World War, the territorial soldiers just volunteered in droves. I mean, loads of them and they went overseas on foreign service. In fact, after the First World War, we had the British Territorial Force, if you like, had deployed overseas on foreign soil 23 divisions of infantry. 23 infantry divisions, that's huge. And I think it was two cavalry or mounted divisions as well. So huge numbers went over. Territorial Force soldiers went over and served in the First World War. And of course, many lost their lives. So after World War One, it was disbanded. They always do that, don't they? As soon as there's the threat's over, right, let's save some money, we'll cut back somewhere, stack this lot. So it got binned, but it reformed again in 1921, I believe it was. I've got a note here somewhere. Yeah, 1921. So when it reformed in 1921, it was called the Territorial Army. That's the first time that actually used that name. It was Territorial Force before. 1921, it reforms Territorial Army. And it stayed the Territorial Army in that title until 1967. Now, obviously, the Territorial Army, as it now was, after 1921, was used extensively in the Second World War. We know that. Loads and loads of Territorial Army soldiers straight out the Second World War. And again, many lost their lives. Officers, especially in the Territorial Army, and even the Territorial Force, were looked down upon by their counterparts. So regular officers sort of looked down a little bit at the TA officers. I think that was a general thing throughout its existence. And I think there's still an element of that today with the Army Reserve. So in 1967 then, they changed the name again. And it was no longer the Territorial Army, it became the TA and VR. The Territorial Army and the Territorial and Volunteer Reserve, TA and VR. TAVR, Territorial and Army Volunteer Reserve, that's right. And it stayed that until 1979 when it reverted back again to just being a Territorial Army. And it stayed a Territorial Army until 2014 when they scrapped it all together. The name Territorial, it was taken away completely and it became what we know now today as the Army Reserve. So, and it's a totally different animal now, the Army Reserve, to what it was in the Cold War days, certainly the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, when it was the Territorial Army, TAVR, whatever you want to call it back then, in those days. It was, I mean, nearly every town, pretty much every town in the UK had a drill hall where there was a TA unit, a TAC, a TA centre. And you see them in most towns, on the outskirts of towns, sometimes in towns. Sometimes there'd be a cadet force bolted onto them as well. So it'd be a TA centre, a TAC, and tucked away there'd be maybe a hut or two or a few classrooms where the local army cadets was also serving. So they was normally bolted together because it made ease of, using the facilities and obviously things like armories and that. So that was quite common, but they started to shut down. But when they were about, nearly every town had one. Nearly everyone had a TA centre. And you could literally just walk up to it, walk in they used to have a drill night. So one weekday night a week, they would have a drill night and it would run from somewhere like, say, 7 o'clock until about 9:30 at night. So it was on a Thursday night. And if you wanted to join up, you're a local lad or girl and you wanted to join your local TA, that's one way you could do it. You just walk straight in, knock on the door, basically, or walk through the gate and say, I want to join up. They'd give you a bit of an interview, give you some paperwork to take away and fill in, and then you'd come back and eventually you'd get your kit, and then you'd be trained initially by that TA centre. So they would, on a drill night and on the odd weekend, they would take you for their own training that they conducted. So they'd teach you to drill, put your uniform on, all the basics, first aid, weapon handling, etc., some basic tactics. And then when you was ready, when they deemed you were ready to go on to your basic training proper, they'd send you away to the depot of that cap badge. And you'd go away for 2 weeks solid and trained by the regular army in a regular army barracks, a depot normally. And when you come back off of that, you were deemed a trained soldier. That's how it was back in those days. And the TA was very much a social club as well. It was a drinking club. There was a bit of a drinking culture, as there was throughout the services then, but certainly it was no different in the Territorial Army. that most TA units, the tax centres, drill halls would have a bar. They would definitely have a bar. And at 9:30, you'd knock off, put your kit away with falling out parade. And then if you wanted to, you could go into like an OR's bar, like a naffy. Normally, they might even have an officers and science mess combined there as well for the others. But there'd be certainly a bar of some description where you could all go and have a drink. And the same thing if you're away on a weekend exercise, you might turn up at your drill on the Friday night, grab all your kit and deploy that Friday night or the Saturday morning. You get back on a Sunday from your exercise, wherever it happened to be, clean the vehicles down, clean your weapons, hand your kit away, and the bar will be open for a while on a Sunday. And then have all their social events throughout the year, like Christmas, etc., Christmas drinks and things like that. So it's a big drinking culture. It's changed a lot. The Army Reserve, they started shutting down all these TA centres. You might have noticed it around where you live in the UK. TA centres started to shut down. And it made it difficult to recruit because before you were aimed at 17, 18 and 19 young lads that might not have a driving licence, but they lived in that town. They could walk into that TA centre, join up, and walk up there every evening or every weekend when they wanted to go away. Once they started getting rid of these TA centres in the towns, obviously cutbacks, it was cheaper, it meant that most people then had to, if they didn't have their own transport, had to rely on transport of some form, friends or family or whatever, public transport, just to get to the TA centres. And I think that put a lot of people off. It wasn't as easily accessible as it was back in those days. So it's a bit of a shame. And of course, options for change after the Cold War, etc., they started to restructure everything. I mean, the regular army, regular forces shrunk down, so did the TA. But interestingly, even before it was renamed the Army Reserve, as it is now in 2014, it got renamed Army Reserve. Even before that, the TA soldiers had the ability, had the option, if you like, to deploy with the regular army on operations. If you wanted to go to Northern Ireland and serve, you had to do what they used to call an S-type engagement, where you would basically sign up to the regular army, go away with that battalion or unit that was deploying to Northern Ireland, train with them, go through all the Operation Banner training, and then you deploy for your actual 6-month tour or 4-month tour, whatever it was then. And then you come back, have your paid leave, and then just resume a normal civil life. Of course, the trouble was, as well, not just that, with all of the TA soldiering, was sometimes employers didn't like it, because if it was a small company, they couldn't afford to lose Dave the electrician or Joe the carpenter or whatever for those sort of periods of time. So it made it difficult. If he was on the dole, if he was unemployed, signed on benefits, and that was ideal, it was extra cash. But they served all over. I mean, I know territorial soldiers that went to Cyprus, the UN peacekeeping. Obviously, some went to Northern Ireland. It was a bit of a backdoor into the regular army as well. You could go away and do a tour, and at the end of that tour, if you'd had a good tour and you'd impressed the commanding officer or the people around you in that particular battalion, that tour, you had the opportunity to go straight in as a soldier and join the regular army that way, because you were basically already in. You're on this type of engagement. I don't think that quite happens now. Bosnia, first of all, Gulf War I comes along, the Gulf War, and a lot of territorial soldiers went out for that. They deployed a whole Scottish field hospital, a whole TA field hospital deployed to the Gulf War I. Then Bosnia come along, lots of territorial soldiers were going out there as individual replacements. There were some small formed units. I know when I was out there in 97, we had a couple of patrols from the Honourable Artillery Company. They came out as a formed unit, so they didn't come out as individual replacements. But a lot of guys were doing individual replacement jobs in Bosnia conflict in the early part of 95 to sort of 98, and I think beyond. So there's quite a lot of them done the Bosnia tours, and maybe Kosovo as well. I don't know too much about that. Along comes Afghanistan, and then in 2001 in Iraq, in 2003 Optelic. And again, they relied heavily on Territorial Army soldiers. In fact, 40% of the hospital-based staff in Afghanistan were Territorial Army personnel, or Army, it would have been Territorial Army personnel in Afghanistan. 40%. And of course, I suppose a lot of those would have been NHS doctors, nurses, specialists, consultants, whatever. So it just shows you that it would have been very difficult for the army to have mounted that operation in Afghanistan and Iraq without the support of the Territorial Army / Army Reserve. So it started to lose its sort of drinking culture, dad's army approach, or the way people looked at them when those campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq kicked off, and they really started to show their worth. A lot of specialist people out there that the army relied on. 27 Territorial Army Reserve soldiers lost their lives in Iraq and Afghanistan, and quite a few of them, quite a number, were decorated as well. So the days of, say, of the drinking club have long gone. I'm not sure what the Army Reserve's like now, about a touch for 10 years nearly now, so I don't know. But I don't think it's looked on as Dad's army as much as it used to be. There was always a niggle when there was regular soldiers, young soldiers especially. You got young soldiers, regular, and young soldiers, TA or Army Reserve. There was all a bit of that, or you're part-time, or you're a stab. That was a favourite one. Used to call the TA stabs, which stood for stupid TA bastard. And I think the TA called the regular army Arabs, arrogant regular army bastards. But that was just the niggly sort of banter. I think once the Territorial Army, Army Reserve lads settled into the tour with their regular counterparts, I think they got a bit more respect then. As I say, the days of drinking clubs of the TA, I think, has long gone to a degree. So, if you join the Army Reserve now, it's totally changed. It has been for a few years. I had experience at Purbright and in Aldershot of training Army Reservists, or Army Reserve and Territorial Army, as they were called then. So now they do, instead of being trained by your own drill hall, you join the process of joining the Army Reserve. You then go away and do 4 weekends of your Phase 1 Alpha. So you do 4 weekends with an ATU, an Army Training Unit, and that's probably Purbright or Grantham, Winchester, something like that. Depends where you are in the country. You go away and do your 4 weekends. That's your Phase 1 Alpha. You can do that in 1 week instead. So if you can get the time off, you can do the whole, sort of spread it over 4 weekends, because they're not consecutive weekends. It's normally a weekend on, maybe 1 or 2 weekends off, and then a weekend again, which can cause skill fade. So a lot of people, if they can take the time, do the 1 week consolidated Phase 1 Alpha course. When you've completed that, you then have to go away for a 16-day continuous course. Again, you go somewhere like Purbright, Winchester, wherever it is, Grantham, and you do 16 weeks course, basic train, basic soldiering, whatever cap badge you are. And then when you've done that, you'll then do your Phase 2 training, which is 2 weeks with your cap badge. So if you're infantry, you'll get a catterick and do the combat infantry course. If you're Royal Engineers, you'll go off to your depot and do your basic engineering, whatever it is. And that's how that works. So when you've finished all that, you're then a trained soldier. Unless you're in 4 para, 4th Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, which is Army Reservists, or the HAC, the Honourable Artillery Company. If you joined either of those units, you'll get trained under those units. You don't go away and do what I've just mentioned, all this going down to Purbright malarkey. You get trained by your own guys because you're specialist units. Another interesting one, if you're fit enough and you're keen enough, without any military experience, you can join the Special Air Service Reserve, either 2-1 Special Air Service or 2-3 Special Air Service, depending where you live in the country. So you can go along and go straight in off the street, and if you pass everything, you're in, and you're in Special Forces. Special Forces. So, pay and conditions, they get paid similar at daily rate TA or Army Reserve soldiers to the regulars. They get an incentive where if they complete all their yearly commitment, which is something like 27 days a year, unless you're in a national unit, it's 19 days, but if you're a normal TA Army Reserve unit, you do 27 days. You've got to do a 2-week annual camp or a course in lieu or attachment to the regular army. And if you complete all that, plus all your what used to be called ITDs, your individual training directives, so that's your first aid test, your CBRN test, your fitness test, your shooting test, your weapon handling, all that, pass all those, make those days commitment. On year 1, you get just over £200 tax-free bonus. It used to be called the bounty. After that, each year it goes up that you serve, that you complete your test to get your bonus. When you get to year 5, you max out there. That's the top bounty or top bonus, as it's called now. And that's about £2,200 odd, tax-free in your bank account. And of course now, reserve soldiers are entitled to pension as well. I don't know how that works exactly. I haven't looked into that. But they are entitled. They never used to be. You know, people would do 20, 30 years in the Territorial Army, and at the end of it, that's it, good night Vienna. But now they're entitled to a pension. So that's a little bit more incentive for them to join. To say, when they had planned the army for 2020, the reservists, they wanted to push them up to 30,000 troops, men and women, in the Army Reserve. It's never going to reach that. It'll never even get that on paper, I don't think. So anyway, that's just a little bit about the Army Reserve, a little bit about the Territorial Army, where it come from, the Territorial Force, etc. It was first formed. I just thought it might be of some interest to you. Anyway, see if I can strap this ankle up a bit better this time. I put my strapping tape on, it didn't work. I wobbled back. So that's enough from me. Please, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please consider it. I'm not saying do it. I'm saying consider it. Please consider it. It'd help my little channel out. It's growing gradually, but I could do with a boost. Thanks very much for watching, and take care, everybody, and I'll see you on the next time. And until then, stay safe, and remember, let's tap.